The house on the hill seemed to sleep silently, as if it, too, had lost someone. It was there that Mary Ellen lived for over 60 years, caring for her family, her grandchildren, and the flowers she herself planted in the front yard. When she passed away at 89, she left behind not only walls covered in memories, but also a family on the verge of falling apart. No one imagined that the reading of the will would bring more than surprises. It would bring a war. And it all began on a cloudy Tuesday afternoon, when the children gathered in the living room, which smelled of old wood and unresolved pasts. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, as if he already knew what he was about to read would cause discord. Sarah, the eldest daughter, crossed her arms, looking at her siblings with an expression of distrust not seen since their school days. Tom, the middle child, tried to remain calm, but drummed his fingers on the arm of the sofa as if counting the seconds. Rebecca, the youngest, was still wearing morning clothes, and the pain in her eyes was real. But as soon as the lawyer uttered the words, "The house will go entirely to Rebecca," the morning atmosphere turned into a storm. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Sarah stood up suddenly, as if she'd been hit by an invisible slap. Tom widened his eyes, muttering, "This has got to be a joke," while Rebecca remained paralyzed, as if she'd also been caught off guard. "Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, thank you. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next is unbelievable." Mary Ellen's justification was simple. According to the will, Rebecca was the one who cared for her in her final years, when her health no longer allowed her to even climb the stairs. But to Sarah and Tom, this felt like a betrayal. They remembered the Christmases, the house repairs, the sacrifices each had made, and suddenly it all seemed in vain. The old house, with its musty basement and dusty attic, became the object of fierce dispute. And there a wound was born that would not easily heal. Sarah threatened to contest the will, hiring her own lawyer the next day. Tom, on the other hand, tried to talk to Rebecca, but what was supposed to be an amicable agreement turned into a bitter argument. Rebecca claimed she hadn't asked for any of this, that she'd simply obeyed her mother. But tensions mounted, fueled by unresolved childhood memories, unspoken secrets, and an old hurt that had always been swept under the rug, like the dust in the house no one wanted to clean. The following Sunday, Tom returned to the house alone to retrieve some tools from the shed. It was strange to enter without hearing Mary Ellen's voice calling from upstairs. He climbed to the attic on impulse, perhaps driven by nostalgia, or something larger. Up there, among old boxes and forgotten books, he noticed something unusual, a loose floorboard in the corner, creaking differently than the others. Curious, he knelt down and tried to lift it. And that's when everything began to change. Beneath the board was a shallow compartment containing a small wooden box locked with a worn leather strap. Tom picked it up carefully, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. What could be in there? A diary? A letter? A secret? When he finally managed to open the box, he found something inside he never expected, a stack of old photographs, folded documents, and a letter addressed to no one. It simply said, "To whoever finds this." Tom ran downstairs, the box in his arms, his heart pounding and his mind racing. In the car, still parked in the yard, he opened the letter with trembling hands. The words seemed to have been written in another time, and perhaps they had been. The handwriting was Mary Ellen's, but the content, it was something no one in the family had ever heard before. It spoke of choices she had made during the war, of silent promises, and of a truth buried with the past. But the most surprising thing was at the end of the letter. Mary Ellen said something had been hidden in that house for decades. Something that belonged to someone else, and that needed to be returned. She asked for forgiveness. She said she had tried to do the right thing, but that time had slipped away. And most intriguing of all, she mentioned a name Tom had never heard before, Joseph. Who was Joseph? And why did his mother seem so remorseful? Tom hadn't told anyone, yet. He pocketed the letter, locked the box in the trunk, and drove away with more questions than answers. This dispute over the house suddenly seemed small. What was there was bigger. Something that could change everything. Maybe even the way they viewed their own mother. He needed time to understand. He needed silence. But fate wouldn't wait. The next morning, Rebecca received a call from an unknown number. An elderly voice on the other end asked for Mary Ellen. When she explained that her mother had passed away, the woman on the phone was silent for a few seconds, and then said, "She promised to call me one day, before she died. She owed me an explanation." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. The woman said her name was June, and she had met Mary Ellen in 1947. Sarah, for her part, remained determined to contest the will. But as she rummaged through old family archives, trying to find any clue that might discredit the decision, she found something that gave her pause: a black-and-white photo hidden among tax papers. It was a very young Mary Ellen, standing next to a man in a military uniform whom no one in the family knew. Sarah brought the photo to Rebecca. "Have you seen this man before?" she asked. Rebecca just shook her head in shock. The siblings then decided to meet again, this time in the kitchen of the house that was now Rebecca's. There, amidst cold coffee and dishes no one touched, they began to piece together the puzzle. Tom showed them the box, the letter, the photos. Sarah revealed the call Rebecca had received. And little by little, they began to realize that their mother might not have been exactly who they thought she was. But there were still missing pieces to the story. And what no one knew was that the basement also held secrets. The discussion of inheritance now seemed like a detail compared to the depth of what they were uncovering. Who was Joseph? What was hidden? And why had Mary Ellen carried all this alone until the end of her life? One thing was certain: they needed to return to that house. Together. Because what lay beneath the floor of that old structure was more than wood and dust. It was the truth. Get ready. What was found under the ground changes everything. The house was silent again, but this time, the footsteps echoing down the hallway weren't Mary Ellen's. They were her children's, still stunned by their attic discoveries. They walked down to the basement with lanterns in hand, like someone entering an ancient church, slowly, respecting the weight of the past. The air down there was damp, smelling of wet wood and stored memories. Tom was the first to notice. One area of the floor seemed newer than the rest, as if someone, years ago, had repaired it, or hidden something. Rebecca knelt, running her hand over the boards. One of them was loose, but not broken. Sarah brought a screwdriver from her father's toolbox, and carefully, they began removing the wood. They hadn't expected to find anything. Maybe a rat's nest, or an old box. But what was there was different. It was a rectangular compartment, carefully lined with dark cloth, and within it, an iron chest with rusty handles. They looked at each other. No one spoke. They just took a deep breath and opened it. Inside the trunk were dozens of envelopes, all stamped with dates between 1946 and 1950. But that wasn't what caught the most attention. Beneath the letters was an antique frame, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed with age. When they unwrapped the paper, the shock was immediate. It was a hand-painted portrait of a woman identical to Mary Ellen, but with clothing and hairstyle typical of post-war Europe. In the bottom corner of the canvas was a signature, "To M.E., with love, Joseph. Paris, 1948. Tom nearly dropped the painting. Rebecca covered her mouth. Sarah went white as a sheet. This wasn't just a memory. It was a message from the past. Joseph wasn't an invention. He existed. And he had been important enough to paint her mother. But what no one could understand was, why had Mary Ellen kept it hidden for so long? What was so dangerous about this love? Continuing to rummage through the trunk, they found something even more surprising. An old passport, issued in the name of Joseph Weber, with a U.S. visa dated 1952. Beside it, a birth certificate of a child named Matthew Weber, born in Chicago in 1953. The mother, Mary Ellen Dawson. The father, Joseph Weber. The world stopped for a second. A son. Another son. What do you mean? Rebecca's legs felt weak. Sarah stood, pacing, muttering, "This can't be real." Tom just stared at the papers, as if trying to make the pieces fit together. Mary Ellen had another child. And no one knew. Matthew Weber. Where was he now? Was he alive? Did he know about the family? Was he the true heir to the house? The questions multiplied. But the most disturbing part was yet to come. At the bottom of the trunk was a special envelope, sealed with red wax. On it was a single phrase, "Open only if my truth is discovered." The brothers didn't hesitate. They opened it. And inside was a letter that seemed written in a different tone, more direct, more confessional. Mary Ellen said she had met Joseph in Germany after the war, when she was volunteering to help displaced civilians. They fell in love. They planned to escape. But he disappeared. She returned to the United States, pregnant, afraid, and without support. No one ever knew about the baby. A couple from the church, who couldn't have children, agreed to raise Matthew as their own, in secret. Mary Ellen visited from afar. She attended birthdays from afar. But she could never tell him who he really was. She wrote, "I lost the love of my life. I lost my son. And I lost my courage. But I never stopped loving any of you." The pain in those words was unbearable. Tom clutched the letter tightly. Rebecca wept softly. Sarah, for the first time in years, felt small before her mother's greatness and tragedy. How could they judge her so quickly? How had they missed the signs? But there was one last clue inside the trunk, a copy of a letter Mary Ellen sent to Matthew, dated 2003. She begged forgiveness. She said it was too late to make amends, but that the truth needed to be told. And at the end, an old phone number, from Seattle. The next day, Rebecca decided to call the number. The call went straight to voicemail. But on the second day, someone answered. The voice was a man's, husky, cautious. When she said she was Mary Ellen's daughter, there was a silence. A long one. Then he said, "I've been waiting for this call for over 20 years. His name was Matthew Dawson Weber. And yes, he was Mary Ellen's son. And no, he didn't know she was dead. Matthew arrived in town 3 days later, alone. His face bore his mother's features. The same way she walked. The same way she adjusted her glasses. His brothers greeted him with suspicion, but also with a curiosity that stung. He told his side of the story. How he was raised by loving parents, but who never spoke of his origins. How, at 20, he accidentally discovered the letter hidden by his adoptive mother. How he tried to contact her, but never received a response. And how he decided to walk away, so as not to cause pain. Sarah didn't know what to feel. Tom wanted to hug him, but he didn't have the courage. Rebecca, as always, was the first to reach out. "You have a home here," she said. But Matthew smiled sadly. "It's not about the house. It's about my mother." They spent the night looking through old photos, trying to fill in the gaps in history. But there was something strange. Matthew commented that Mary Ellen seemed to have left something for him, something he should find. Back in the basement, everyone began searching every corner. It was Tom who noticed a loose panel behind the tool shelves. Behind it was a small safe built into the wall. It had the same lock pattern Mary Ellen used in her room. They used her birth date as the code, and it worked. Inside the safe was only one object, a small gold cross engraved with a Latin inscription. And a note, "You were always in your mother's heart." Matthew held the cross in both hands, as if it were the proof he needed. The tears came silently. Sarah wept too. For her mother. For herself. For everything that could have been different. But there was something else about that cross. On the back, a subtle marking, as if it could be opened. Tom took a small key from the toolbox and tried. And inside was a microfilm. Old. Almost illegible. But with an inscription, "Joseph. Paris. 1951. The family now faced a new dilemma. What was on that microfilm? Who could reveal its contents? Was it valuable? Compromising? And, most of all, was Joseph still alive? The questions reopened doors that Mary Ellen herself had tried to close her entire life. But how could they ignore it all now? The house was no longer just an inheritance. It was a labyrinth of buried stories, and the next step would take them even deeper. The day dawned gray, but inside the house, the light of truth began to illuminate what had been darkness. Matthew decided to stay for a few days. The brothers, once at war, now felt the need for unity. But no one knew that, at the same time, someone from the past was about to return. Someone who had also known Mary Ellen. Someone who, for decades, had waited for an answer. And who now was on his way. The morning was quieter than usual. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in the backyard as if whispering secrets. Rebecca was alone in the house, organizing boxes in the basement, when she found something that seemed out of place, a crumpled envelope hidden behind a wooden beam. It was small, yellowed, with a broken seal and the date stamped in red. October 10th, 1947. There was no return address. Just a name in the center, Mary Ellen Dawson. She ran upstairs with the envelope in her hands, her heart racing. She knew she had to wait for her brothers to open it. But there was something about that paper, something that called urgently. When Tom and Sarah arrived, they were greeted by the letter on the kitchen table. "I didn't find it in the trunk. It was in the basement, between the rafters." Silence fell. And then, with trembling hands, Rebecca opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten, in English and German. Tom began reading aloud. The letter was from Joseph, written shortly before he disappeared from Mary Ellen's life. And the content was heartbreaking. "My dear Ellen, if you're reading this, it's because I managed to deliver this letter as promised. I'm being followed. I don't know if I'll make it to Paris. But I want you to know, you are the reason for every beat of my heart." He spoke of plans, of love, and of a secret that needed to be protected. A secret that, if revealed, could cost lives. Sarah brought her hands to her face. It was the first time she'd heard the name Ellen used like that. An intimate, tender name. Joseph was talking about a hidden document, something he'd recovered during the war and needed to keep away from greedy eyes. He'd confided this secret to her, without her knowing. He'd hidden it in something he'd given her before leaving, a necklace with a cross. The same one that was in the safe. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a hiding place. The letter also said that Joseph had been offered a job with an underground group trying to save persecuted refugees. But that someone close to them had betrayed them. "If I disappear, Ellen, don't look for me. Protect our son. And never ever tell anyone who he is." It was like a punch in the gut. Rebecca held the letter as if it were a piece of her mother's soul. Tom was silent for a long time. And Sarah began to cry. Again. Matthew read the letter later. He took his time. He read it slowly. He paused after each sentence. When he finished, he said nothing. He just went to the window and stood there, staring out at the yard for long minutes. Then he said, "She never told me because she was afraid. And maybe she was right. But there was something else." Joseph spoke of a contact in New York. A man named Peter Klein. He would be the only reliable person Mary Ellen should talk to if anything happened. Sarah picked up her phone and began searching for Peter Klein. But the name was common. Hundreds of records. None directly linked to Joseph Weber. Until, on a genealogy forum, they found an old message from 2006. Someone mentioned a Peter Klein, a former military translator, who lived in Buffalo and claimed to have been friends with a Joe W. during the post-war years. Could it be him? Was he still alive? Tom called a number listed in a small city directory. A woman answered. She said Peter had died in 2012, but that he left behind several diaries. He was her grandfather, and he kept everything he remembered from the war in boxes in the attic. His granddaughter, Emily, offered to look for any mention of Joseph. A day later, she called back. "I found something. You guys need to see this." And she emailed a scan of a page from the diary. The page described a mission to Hamburg in 1947. Joseph and Peter carried a batch of forged documents used to rescue families from concentration camps. But they were ambushed. Joseph disappeared. They never saw him again. But the most shocking part, Peter wrote that Joseph trusted a microcopy of confidential Datato, the woman he loved, hidden in a golden cross. The same microfilm that was now with Mary Ellen's children. Rebecca gasped. What was on that microfilm? Government secrets? Protected identities? Evidence of treason? They needed to know. Matthew took the artifact to a historical archives restoration specialist in Boston. A week later, the answer came. The microfilm contained a list of names, Jews saved with the help of forged documents, and traitors infiltrated into the Allied army. Names that, to this day, could reopen wounds or reveal lies. Among the names, there was one that stood out: Karl Metzger, a former Nazi officer, supposedly killed in 1945. But according to the microfilm, he had escaped and assumed a new identity on American soil. That changed everything. Joseph was not just a man in love. He was a silent hero, a guardian of truths the world tried to forget. And Mary Ellen was complicit in it all. By love, by courage, by faith. Sarah picked up her mother's old Bible, the one that had been by her bedside until her last day. As she leafed through it, a photograph fell to the floor. It was Mary Ellen, sitting in a church pew. Beside her, a blurry figure, who, from a distance, looked like Joseph. On the back, a handwritten verse: "The truth will set you free." John 8 verse 32. It was all so symbolic, so intense. They would never see their mother the same way again. In the same Bible, Rebecca found an old postcard with the address of a church in New York. They decided to go there. The pastor received them respectfully. He said Mary Ellen had been there only once, in 1988. That she had left a sealed envelope. He asked that it be given only to her children when they discovered the whole truth. It was unbelievable. Everything had been foreseen, planned, protected. The envelope bore only one sentence: "If you have come this far, it is because you have chosen truth. Now, choose peace." Inside were copies of documents Mary Ellen had collected over the years. Evidence that Joseph had tried to contact her in 1958. But he had been prevented. By intercepted letters. By fear. By silence. And among the papers, a handwritten letter from Joseph. Never delivered. In this last letter, Joseph said he was ill. That he had tried to rebuild his life, but something always pulled him back: the memory of her. "If you still love me, meet me where it all began." And he pointed to a flower stand in Central Park, where they had first met in 1946. The question was, did Mary Ellen go? Did she ever meet him? No one knew. But there was one final detail. An old receipt, kept with the letter. Purchase of train tickets to New York, dated 3 days after Joseph's letter. Mary Ellen went. Alone. Never told anyone. And never spoke of it again. But now, her children knew. And this story was far from over. Because in Central Park, someone was waiting for them. And that person knew Mary Ellen's story very well. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Central Park lawn. It was an ordinary weekend for those passing by, but for the Dawson siblings, the day felt like something out of an old movie. They held in their hands the last clue left by Mary Ellen, the place where she and Joseph first met, decades ago. Rebecca clutched the envelope containing his letter tightly, as if the words were still warm. Tom looked around, trying to find something, or someone, that made sense. Sarah, more skeptical, paced in circles. But then, he appeared. A gray-haired man, impeccably poised, and wearing a light-colored suit, walked slowly toward the flower bench. He paused for a few seconds, looked around, and then sat down. In his hands was a brown-covered book with faded writing. Tom couldn't explain why, but something about the man seemed familiar. He decided to approach. "Excuse me, do you come here often?" The man smiled. "For exactly 30 years, every Saturday." And then, as if revealing a secret, he added, "Waiting for someone who never returned." Rebecca and Sarah gathered together. They explained who they were. They showed the letter. And for the first time, the man trembled. "Mary Ellen was the love of my life. It was him. Joseph. Still alive. Still waiting." The emotion was so overwhelming that Rebecca had to sit down. Sarah cried uncontrollably. Tom tried to remain calm, but his hands were shaking. Joseph looked at them all with teary eyes. "You are hers. And she was everything to me." The reunion no one expected was happening there, before curious eyes, in the middle of Central Park. But what Joseph revealed next left everyone speechless. He knew about Matthew. He had only learned of his son's existence in recent years, when he accidentally received a letter from Mary Ellen that had been returned by mistake. He discovered he had a son, and that she had kept him secret for his own protection. She wrote to me asking for forgiveness. But I never needed to forgive her. I understood her. The love between them, even separated by time, was still palpable. Warm. Real. Joseph asked to meet Matthew. He wanted to see his son, hear his voice. He said he'd never had any other children. He'd lived a lonely life, working as a librarian in small villages, far from the eyes of the world. The only family I ever had was the memory of her. When Matthew arrived, it was like a mirror of emotions. He was paralyzed for seconds. Then they embraced, wordlessly, unhurriedly, with the intensity of someone who'd waited a lifetime for this. The reunion was too powerful to fit into a single day. They rented a small cottage near the lake and spent the weekend together. Joseph told his story. He showed old photographs, notes he'd saved, a dried rose Mary Ellen gave him in 1947. He also told of the threats he received after the war, and how he'd had to live in hiding, changing his name, his city, his past. But the biggest secret was yet to come. On the last night, Joseph called the brothers together for a candlelit conversation. He took a small wooden box from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. She gave this to me before we left Germany. She said it was something I must protect, even if the world said otherwise. Inside the box was an original birth certificate, Matthew's. But on it, a surprising detail, the place of birth was listed as Munich, Germany, not Chicago. Matthew was shocked. He always thought he'd been born in the United States. But the truth was different. Mary Ellen had him during the final months of her mission in Europe. And only later did she bring him, illegally, with false documents, to protect him. The church that took him in knew. His adoptive parents knew. But the world, I never knew. The son no one knew was also the son of two lands. A bridge between past and present. A missing link in history. Sarah needed air. She ran outside. Rebecca followed. She lied to us her whole life. Sarah murmured. But Rebecca responded tenderly. She survived. She protected. She loved in silence. That's not a lie. It's sacrifice. And there, under the stars, hearts began to understand that there are truths only time can explain. And that some mothers love so much, they choose to carry the pain alone. Tom, who had always been the most reserved, approached Joseph and asked, "Why didn't you ever reach out to us before?" Joseph looked him in the eye and replied, "Because Mary Ellen asked me to. And when we truly love, we respect even the silence of the person we love." That phrase echoed in everyone's minds. 4 years, they had judged their mother by her will. Now, they discovered she had made unthinkable choices out of love. Joseph wanted nothing of the inheritance. Not the house. Not the possessions. He just wanted time. With Matthew. With the grandchildren he might one day meet. With the memory of Mary Ellen. She visited me, just once, in 1988. She spent 3 hours with me. Then she left. She said she couldn't stay. But her embrace has stayed with me ever since. This revelation was like an arrow piercing the past, and uniting what was left. Matthew decided to take Joseph on a tour of the house. When he entered, he stood in the doorway for several minutes. He touched the walls. He smelled the scents. He walked to the kitchen. She cooked while listening to jazz. She always tapped her spoon on the counter 3 times before tasting the soup. It was as if time were rewinding. As if Mary Ellen were there, in that moment, smiling. As they walked through the house, Joseph stopped in front of the living room mirror. "This is where she first told me she loved me." He pulled a small, old silver ring from his pocket. It was hers. From when she was a nurse. She gave it to me as a promise. I kept it. Always. Rebecca took the ring and placed it on the table next to Mary Ellen's portrait. "She sees all this," he said. And no one doubted it. But as always, there was more. Joseph mentioned a final letter Mary Ellen sent him, years after the 1988 meeting. She asked him to seek out a man, someone who knew the whole truth about the hidden documents. This man lived in rural North Carolina. He claimed to have been the last person Joseph saw before his escape to America. His name? Pastor Caleb Hudson. a former American missionary who operated behind the scenes during the war. When Rebecca searched for records, she found only a small blog from an evangelical community that still kept his story alive. Caleb's grandson, when contacted, said, "Yes, my grandfather knew Joseph, and he said he carried a secret that could change the course of modern history." And in the church basement, there were more documents. The North Carolina cottage seemed frozen in time. It was a small white church with wooden windows and worn pews. Pastor Caleb's grandson, a young man named Elijah, welcomed them with kindness and surprise. "My grandfather used to say that one day the children of truth would come to collect what was left here." The phrase sounded almost biblical. But what no one expected was that, in the church basement, there was more than words. There was evidence. There was a legacy. There was value. They descended together, guided by a handheld flashlight. The basement was simple, with shelves filled with old Bibles, files, and hand-labeled boxes. Elijah pointed to one. This one was marked, "Weber and Dawson, do not open without confirmation of origin." It was impossible not to feel a chill. Upon opening the box, they found a small notebook, dated between 1945 and 1951. Each page contained entries made by Joseph, in code. But what caught the most attention was what lay just below, a weathered leather folder containing photos, maps, certificates, and among them, something that seemed completely out of place, a gold brooch encrusted with red stones. Elijah commented, "This sat on the shelf for years. We thought it was antique jewelry. Until a local historian said it might be from the 19th century, and worth a small fortune." The brooch belonged to Joseph's family. And its origins? Imperial. Tom carefully picked up the brooch. Rebecca searched online for something similar and found a nearly identical image in a European art auction catalog. Estimated value? Over $2 million. Sarah was speechless. What did that mean? Joseph explained, "My grandmother hid it before fleeing Prussia. It was passed down from generation to generation, until it reached me. And Mary Ellen told me to hide it well. And he obeyed." The brooch wasn't just valuable financially. It had historical, symbolic, and sentimental value. Mary Ellen knew what she was keeping. And she knew that one day, it could protect or provide for her children. Elijah further commented, "Some say this type of jewelry was worn by nobles in hiding after the fall of the German Empire. The fact that it survived the war is a miracle in itself." Now, the question was, what to do with it? Matthew, who had always lived with the bare minimum, looked at the blowjob as if it didn't belong to him. Sarah was thinking about settling all the family's financial debts. Tom suggested donating some of it to charity. But Rebecca said something that made everyone stop. Mom kept this hidden not to enrich herself, but to protect herself. The question isn't, how much is it worth, but, what is it for? And that changed the course of the conversation. In that same leather briefcase was also an old deed. It was a piece of land located in Ohio, registered to Joseph Weber, a discreet purchase made in 1952. It was a rural location with little commercial value at the time. But what no one knew was that, today, that piece of land sat directly on one of the largest natural gas reserves in the region. The estimated value of the property? $25 million. Yes, $25 million. The family fell silent. It was unbelievable. How had something so grand been hidden for so long? How had Mary Ellen never mentioned it? Joseph explained, she believed that greed destroyed families. And she didn't want you to grow up with it as a burden. It was a difficult choice to understand, but easy to respect. Still, now that everything was out in the open, decisions needed to be made. Rebecca suggested hiring a neutral attorney to handle the legalization. Sarah agreed, but demanded that everything be registered in the family name as Mary Ellen Dawson Foundation for social and historical purposes. Tom supported. And Matthew, for the first time, smiled. My mother lived in silence, but her story will echo for generations. It was the beginning of something new. Something bigger. Something restorative. But it wasn't just about money. Inside Joseph's notebook was more, detailed drawings of hidden artifacts, references to the names of saved survivors, and a map to a basement in Paris. The place where Joseph believed a box forgotten by history still resided. the mission he failed to complete, and which now was in the hands of Mary Ellen's children. Sarah, previously skeptical, now spearheaded plans to travel to France. Rebecca researched foundations that could help authenticate the documents. Tom kept in touch with historians. And Matthew, even though he was still processing everything, knew he was part of something extraordinary. They weren't just heirs to a house. They were heirs to a mission. Halfway through this journey, Joseph handed over a sealed envelope with clear instructions: open only when all are together and at peace. They waited until Saturday dinner, when they gathered in the backyard. There, next to Mary Ellen's garden, they opened it. Inside, a final letter. Written by her. Short. Direct. Touching. My children, what I hid from you was out of love. What I leave you now is freedom. Live wisely. Love courageously. And never forget, truth is the greatest gift God has given us. It was there, beneath the lights strung on the porch, that everyone wept. Not in pain, but in gratitude. Mary Ellen was gone, but she never stopped guiding. And even though she didn't want riches, she ended up leaving a priceless legacy. Not just in gold or land, but in legacy, in courage, in faith. A faith that spanned wars, silences, and generations. But fate still had surprises in store. Upon seeking more information about the Ohio land, they discovered that it had been used for years by a small immigrant community. Simple people who built a life there, unaware that they were on land of historical significance. One of the residents recounted that a woman named Ellen visited the site in 1989. She said the soil needed tending, because promises were buried there. That phrase echoed in Rebecca's heart for days. What did Mary Ellen mean by buried promises? Was it a metaphor? Or was there something more beneath that earth? The county courthouse was simple, with worn carpets and noisy fans. But that morning, the atmosphere felt tense. The dispute over Mary Ellen's house was still open, as Sarah had filed her defense before the full truth came out. Even with everything they had uncovered, the hearing needed to happen. It was as if the past demanded a formal settlement. A rite of passage. Rebecca arrived early, accompanied by Matthew and Joseph. They were calm, but there was a heaviness in the air. Tom arrived soon after, carrying the box of documents revealing the family's hidden legacy. Sarah, reluctantly, appeared with her lawyer. It was no longer about the value of the house. It was about honor, about the justice of what Mary Ellen chose, and what the world was trying to understand. And in that room, the judge represented the balance between the legal and the moral. The judge, a gray-haired man named Harold Simmons, looked at the documents and the emotional faces before him. I confess that in 40 years of justice, I have never heard a story like this, he said. He asked each person to speak. They started with Sarah. She admitted that at first she felt betrayed, that she believed Rebecca had manipulated Mary Ellen. But then, everything changed. Now, I know that our mother was greater than we imagined. Rebecca spoke with a firm voice and an open heart. She told how she cared for her mother in recent years, how she uncovered her secrets, how she forgave before she understood. She taught me that love is carrying burdens others can't. And today, I just want to honor that. Tom showed the foundation documents, the Ohio property, the valuable brooch. None of this is ours by right, but it is ours by design. Matthew was silent for a few seconds. Then he simply said, I just wanted to know who I was. Now I know. I am the son of the bravest woman I have ever known. Joseph rose slowly. The courtroom fell silent. He walked to the center of the room, leaning on a dark wooden cane. Your Honor, I know I may not have a voice here, but if you had known Mary Ellen as I did, you would have trusted her with your life, too. Then he took from his pocket the antique ring she had given him. She gave me back hope, and now, I give you back the world she left. The judge called a recess. He needed to reflect. He left the room, leaving everyone in a tense silence. Outside, the sky was overcast. Sarah paced back and forth. Rebecca held the golden cross between her fingers. Matthew stared at the ground. Joseph closed his eyes. And Tom? Tom just prayed. Silently. Lord, May the truth that set our mother free now unite us." It was a simple prayer, and powerful. When the judge returned, his eyes were teary. This is no ordinary case. It involves the soul, not just the law. And then he read his decision. The house would remain in Rebecca's name, as Mary Ellen had wished. But by the court's recommendation and the consent of all the siblings, it would be transformed into a memorial. A place of memory, faith, history, and reconciliation. An open house to the world. The Mary Ellen Dawson Foundation would be officially recognized, and part of the value of the properties and artifacts would be allocated to preserving the memory of forgotten families of the war. This woman's legacy is not material. It is moral. It is eternal. The judge closed the case with a phrase that would be remembered forever: "When truth finds shelter, even justice kneels." Outside, the church bells rang at noon. As if in celebration, Sarah hugged Rebecca for the first time in years. She said, "She won." And Rebecca replied, "No, we won, because her pain healed us." Matthew handed the original certificate to the judge for the record, and Tom took Joseph's arm as they descended the stairs. "You have a family now. Complete." Joseph just smiled. But like everything in this story, there was more. After the hearing, Judge Harold handed Rebecca a sealed envelope. "Your mother gave this to me over 20 years ago. She said that one day you would come to me, and that this time would be right." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, in familiar handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means that love won, that truth healed, and that, in the end, justice was served not by what we took, but by what we gave." And there, amid tears, hugs, and promises, the family began to rebuild. But the journey wasn't over yet, because at the bottom of that envelope there was a note with an address. From Paris. And the following sentence: "A secret still awaits. Where it all began. Find it." Night fell with an eerie silence over Mary Ellen's old house. After the judge's ruling, the siblings decided to spend one last weekend together there as a form of closure. Rebecca was in her mother's room, sorting through boxes. Tom was reading old school notebooks, and Sarah was helping Matthew catalog the objects for the memorial. But something about that night felt different. The wind blew the curtains even with the windows closed. Around 11, a dull thud echoed from the basement. Once, twice, 3 times. Everyone stopped. Tom was the first to speak. It was the wind. But Rebecca's look said otherwise. Matthew stood, grabbed a flashlight, and said, "Let's see." They went downstairs together. The air was colder than usual. The basement, which had previously seemed merely dusty, now smelled strongly of wet wood and something else. As if trapped in time. The floorboards creaked underfoot. Matthew shone the light into the corners. Rebecca held her mother's cross in her hands. Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, watching from afar. And then something glinted behind the old bookshelf. Tom moved the books. A cold breeze escaped through a crack in the wall. "There's a passage here," he said hoarsely. Behind the bookshelf was a low iron door, covered with old boards and nails. It looked as if it hadn't been opened in decades. With effort, they managed to open it. Inside was a small room, like a cell. The walls were stone. In the center, a chair and a small wooden table. On it, an unlit candle, a Bible open to Psalm 91, and a diary. A diary written by Mary Ellen. The first page was marked with a red ribbon. And on it, a single sentence: "If you've come this far, it's because the past needs to speak." As Rebecca read aloud, the chill deepened. Mary Ellen wrote that this room was her refuge of prayer. A place where she wept silently and gave God everything she couldn't tell anyone. It was there that she wrote most of the letters she never sent. Where she asked forgiveness for the sins of others. Where she asked for strength to protect her children from the truth and pain. It was a hidden sanctuary. Tom noticed something strange on the back wall. A section of the stone looked different, as if it had been cemented over later. He touched it, and felt a void behind it. Carefully, they used a tool to break up the plaster. Behind it, they found a small iron box, embedded in the wall. Inside, an object that would change everything: a cassette tape. Labeled in shaky letters, Confession, 1989. Sarah ran upstairs to get a tape recorder. When they loaded the tape, the sound crackled, old. But the voice was Mary Ellen's. If you ever hear this, you'll know what I could never say. I saw. I heard. And for a long time, I pretended not to know. Her voice trembled. The basement of that house holds more than prayers. It holds a truth I tried to bury. Everyone froze. Mary Ellen recounted a night in 1953, shortly after returning from Europe with Matthew as a baby. She heard footsteps in the house, but no one lived with her. When she went downstairs, she saw a figure in the basement. A man. Tall. Dark hair. It was Karl Metzger. The same name from the microfilm list. A Nazi officer Joseph believed had escaped. He smiled at her and said, "You have something that's mine." She ran. She hid Matthew. And you never told anyone. But ever since that night, he had nightmares. He heard voices knocking on the wall. I thought I was going crazy. But something told me, protect your son. Protect the cross. It was from that night on that Mary Ellen built the secret room. A refuge. And she placed everything in God's hands. But I always knew that one day the past would knock on the door. The tape continued. In 1971, I received an anonymous letter. With a single sentence, "I'm still around." Ever since, I knew he was still watching me. Mary Ellen described a constant presence. People who disappeared. A neighbor who left without explanation. And an envelope left in the mailbox with the same signature as Karl Metzger. The evil didn't go away. It just hid. And if this tape is ever heard, you need to finish what I started. It was then that they heard a knock. Again. Once, twice, 3 times. But this time, it came from inside the house. Everyone ran upstairs. The living room lights flickered. The front door was ajar. An envelope lay on the floor. No return address. Inside, a photo of Mary Ellen in 1988, with a man in a suit. It was Karl. Older, but alive. On the back, a handwritten sentence. "Do you still keep what's mine?" Matthew fell to his knees. Sarah screamed. Rebecca closed her eyes and clutched the cross. Tom was staring at the door, as if expecting someone to enter. Joseph, pale, said, "He's still alive. Or, someone wants us to think he is." The past didn't just return. It was present. And maybe I never left. They called the police, but the envelope seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. No fingerprints. No cameras caught it. The sheriff suggested it was a practical joke. But everyone knew it wasn't. There was more to that house. More than they imagined. And perhaps the final piece of the puzzle lay exactly where it all began, in the place mentioned in the note left by the mother. Paris looked like a movie set, with its cobblestone streets, bustling cafes, and golden sunset sky. But for the Dawson brothers, this wasn't a tourist trip. It was a mission. Guided by Mary Ellen's letters, they sought answers. Rebecca held the envelope with the address she'd given. A former convent, on the outskirts of Montmartre, where it all began, and perhaps where it all would end. Upon arriving at the convent, they were greeted by an elderly nun named Sister Claire. Her eyes were ice blue, but her voice was as warm as a blanket. "Are you Ellen's children?" she asked, as if she had known they would one day come. She was a woman of faith, but also of secrets. Sister Claire led them to a small archive room, where Mary Ellen had left a sealed box. She said, "Only hand it over if you come with a forgiving heart." Inside the box was an antique rosary, made of wood and silver, with a small hidden compartment in one of the beads. Inside, a small note folded in 4, "Faith has been my strength, but now it must be yours." And along with it, a Bible, in French and English. Mary Ellen had left several notes in the margins, with dates, places, and verses highlighted. But the one that caught her attention most was Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, of whom shall I be afraid?" It was Sister Claire who revealed something no one expected. Mary Ellen spent several months at the convent shortly after the war, caring for orphans and refugees. It was there that she and Joseph were in hiding. And it was there that she discovered she was pregnant with Matthew. She cried for days. Not out of shame, but out of fear. The world wasn't safe. And she knew she would have to protect him from more than just poverty. It was there that her faith became a shield. Inside the convent, there was a small, quiet chapel with blue and purple stained glass windows. Rebecca sat in the front pew, holding her mother's cross. Sarah lit a candle. Matthew knelt and simply said, "Thank you, God, for her." Tom silently opened the Bible left by Mary Ellen and found, folded between the pages, another letter. And what it said would change everything. In the letter, Mary Ellen revealed that her faith wasn't born in church. It was born in a trench, during a bombing raid. It was there that she promised God that if she survived, she would dedicate her life to saving others. And so she did. But along the way, she carried guilt that no pastor could alleviate. "I wasn't perfect, but I tried to be obedient, and my obedience saved lives." This confession was more powerful than any sermon. She also wrote, "Faith sustained me in the days when fear was greater than hope. When I thought I had lost Joseph. When I buried letters I never sent. When I had to say, 'Mom,' from a distance. My faith said, 'Keep going.' And I did." The siblings looked at each other. For the first time, they understood that their mother was not just an ordinary woman. She was a spiritual warrior, a guardian of good. At the chapel altar, Sister Claire displayed one last relic, an audio tape left by Mary Ellen in 1995. When they pressed play, they heard her voice, soft and serene. "If my life was worth living, it was because God gave me strength when no one else could. If you're listening to this, believe me, everything you need, you already have. It's right there inside." And then, a sigh. As if she knew that the journey was only just beginning. Mary Ellen's faith was able to keep secrets that time could not destroy. It was she who guided Joseph through silence. It was she who prevented hatred from contaminating her children. It was she who transformed a simple home into a refuge of prayer. And it was she who left invisible marks on every wall, every object, every handwritten word. As if to say, "Don't look for me in answers. Find me in peace." Matthew, touched, decided to do something bold, baptize himself in the convent's small font, right there. He said he wanted to be reborn, this time with a name, a past, and faith. "I am Matthew Weber Dawson, son of Joseph, son of Mary Ellen, son of Grace." The nun smiled and blessed him. And for the first time, the brothers applauded. They applauded the healing, the rebirth, the courage to begin again. Outside, the sky was clear. The bells rang, and something in the air felt different, light, as if forgiveness had been released on the wind. Sarah held her mother's rosary and promised, "This story doesn't end here." Rebecca agreed, "We'll tell it. We'll show it. Because God entrusted this to us for a reason." Tom, moved, said, "The world needs more stories like hers." Before leaving Paris, they returned to the address marked in their last letter. A former orphanage, now a museum. There, they discovered that Mary Ellen had anonymously sponsored the education of over 40 children. She never told anyone. She never sought recognition. But there, on a marble wall, her full name was engraved, in memory of Ellen Dawson, mother of many, beloved of God. But there was one last surprise. The museum director handed them a box left by Mary Ellen years ago. Inside was a key and a note. "The true treasure is where you hear God loudest." The key was American, and the address was back in the United States. A place they'd never heard of, Golden Springs, Missouri. And the note said, "There, you will find what remains." Golden Springs, Missouri, seemed like one of those towns forgotten by time. Just a main road, a wooden church in the center, and houses with porches that told stories no one else heard. When the brothers arrived, they brought more than suitcases. They carried the weight of generations. The key left by Mary Ellen led them to an old, pale brick house beside a wheat field. An elderly woman was waiting for them at the gate. She introduced herself as Grace. "Mary Ellen asked me to take care of this place until you came. I thought she'd never send anyone, But God has His timing." Her voice was firm but gentle. She showed them the house, simple yet welcoming. Then she pointed to a back door. She said this is where you'd find the last piece of her. The air grew heavy. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. The door led to a small room lined with books, notebooks, and photographs. It was as if Mary Ellen had built a secret memorial there, just for her children. There were letters written to each of them. Words never spoken in life, but now powerfully permeated time. The letter to Sarah began, "My daughter who never accepted halves." Tom said, "You were my silent shield." And Rebecca's, "The woman who taught me to care." But Matthew's was different. "My son, who learned the truth too late, but with enough faith to honor it." Mary Ellen asked for forgiveness. But she also asked for courage. She said the decision she made would leave scars, but that love was the only real remedy. If you're reading this, it's because you've come this far together. Now, decide, will you stay together, or will you each carry on with your own piece of the story? The question echoed between them like a silent judgment. Sarah was the first to speak up. She said she wanted to move on. Alone. "I've come to terms with the past. I've made my peace. But now, I need to take care of my future." Tom tried to convince her to stay. Rebecca cried. Matthew remained silent. Joseph, sitting in the porch rocking chair, just watched. He knew this part would be the hardest. It wasn't against external enemies. It was against pride. That night, there was an argument. Harsh words were exchanged. Old accusations surfaced. Sarah said Rebecca had always had her mother's affection. Rebecca replied that she had taken care of her mother when no one else was around. Tom shouted that he was tired of being the peacemaker. Matthew left the house and spent hours walking through the fields. The night seemed darker than ever, and the pain closer than ever. But something happened that morning. A storm hit Golden Springs, strong and unexpected. The house lost power, and in the darkness, the four found themselves in the living room, sitting on the floor, waiting for the power to come back on. It was there, wordlessly, that they began to remember. Of childhood laughter. Of stories Mary Ellen told on Christmas Eve. Of prayers before meals. And slowly, their hearts began to soften. Rebecca was the first to speak. "We don't have to be the same. We just have to respect each other." Tom added, "She died trying to keep us together. Let's not bury that now." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, said, "I don't know if I can stay, but I don't want to leave angry." Matthew looked at each of them and said, "You are my only family. If we lose each other now, none of this will have been worth it." The next morning, they went to the local church. Grace accompanied them. There, before the simple, silent altar, they found an envelope pinned to the front pew. It was the last one. If you've made it this far, it means you've chosen forgiveness. And that is the greatest miracle of all. Mary Ellen left there, not a secret, but a blessing. And an invitation. Rebuild what time has almost destroyed. You still have time. Back home, they decided together. They would transform the place into a center of remembrance and support. A space for women who, like Mary Ellen, lived between silence and sacrifice. A place of faith, welcome, and hope. Sarah suggested the name. House of Truth. Tom would handle the legal side. Rebecca would move in to coordinate. And Matthew would write his mother's book, with Joseph's help. However, not everything was certain. The wound between them still ached. The journey would be long. But for the first time, there was a shared purpose. And as they tidied up the house, Grace brought a gift left by Mary Ellen. A hand-embroidered picture with a single phrase, "Love covers a multitude of sins." 1 Peter 4:8. They hung the picture in the entryway of their house as a symbol of a new beginning. As dusk fell, they sat on the porch. They didn't say much. They just listened to the crickets, felt the breeze. And for a moment, it was as if Mary Ellen were there, sitting among them, smiling, at peace. But fate had one last call. Because among the old documents, Rebecca found a letter written by Joseph, never sent. Addressed to a name no one recognized. But one that would change everything. Jonathan Metzger. The letter was yellowed, The ink almost faded. But the name written at the top was clear. Jonathan Metzger. Rebecca held the paper as if it were a bomb. The surname was familiar. All too familiar. Matthew was the first to remember. It was the same as Karl Metzger, the alleged Nazi officer who had persecuted Mary Ellen decades earlier. The question was inevitable. Who was Jonathan? Joseph sat slowly in the porch chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Karl had a son. Born in the United States. Raised under another identity. He'd learned of this in the 1960s, through an intercepted letter. Mary Ellen wanted to find him, but thought it was dangerous. She said if he'd inherited his father's heart, all would be lost. But if he'd inherited his mother's soul, then there was hope. The letter Mary Ellen left was addressed to Jonathan, with words of warning and compassion. She recounted her story with Karl, the persecution, the threats, the silence. But she also said, "You are not your father. You can choose. And if you ever read this, come find me. I have something to give you. Something your father took from others, but which can now be returned in peace." It was the letter of a woman who believed in redemption. Tom found an address at the bottom of the letter. A town in rural Iowa. They decided to go. All of them. It was the last promise. The last piece of the puzzle. When they got there, they found an old bookstore on a nearly deserted street. The owner, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a kind expression. Name, Jonathan. When Rebecca showed him the letter, he turned pale. He sat down and wept. "My mother told me part of the story. She said my father was a dark man. But she raised me with faith. With values." Jonathan was a cultured, Christian, and reserved man. When he read Mary Ellen's letter, his hands trembled. "I dreamed of this moment. I knew there was something missing." And then he confessed. He had received a letter from Mary Ellen years before, but had never had the courage to respond. Jonathan revealed that he had kept something from his father, a notebook of encrypted notes, documents, and a small key. He never knew what it unlocked. "I thought it was just historical junk." But when Tom saw the key, he recognized it. It was the same as the one in the hidden safe in his mother's house. The only difference was the engraved number, 1472. A code. A location. Something that was yet to be revealed. Back at the house, the brothers opened the original safe. Inside, they found a hidden compartment. The new key worked. And what was hidden there was the true end of the story. A roll of microfilm, unlike the others. It contained images, recordings, and confessions of Nazi officials. It was the complete dossier Joseph had tried to protect. The same one that nearly cost him his life. The same one Mary Ellen had kept silent about for over 60 years. Jonathan wept upon seeing the images. "This is my father's dark legacy. But now, finally, I can do right." He donated all the material to a Holocaust memorial museum. He requested anonymity. He embraced Matthew, saying, "We both came from stories that could destroy us. But we chose to build. And that makes us brothers in a way that even blood cannot explain." Days later, the brothers returned to Golden Springs. At the House of Truth, they prepared for the opening ceremony. The memorial was ready. In the main hall, a large photo of Mary Ellen smiling. Beside it, her letters, the brooch, the cross, the microfilm. But what caught the most attention was a screen with the following phrase: "She didn't hide secrets. She kept promises." During the ceremony, Joseph took the floor. Mary Ellen lived between fear and faith. And she chose faith. Always. Today, we are the fruit of that choice. Matthew then read an excerpt from the last letter she left. "If my life was difficult, it was because God entrusted me with missions few would understand. But it was all worth it. If today you are here, together, free, at peace." The most moving moment was when a stranger stood up and said, "I was one of the children Mary Ellen helped in Paris. She saved me. She gave me shelter. She taught me to pray." Everyone was moved. Mary Ellen's story had impacted people the brothers didn't even know existed. Her love had echoed far beyond their family. At the end, Rebecca asked everyone to pray. And as they held hands in silence, a gentle breeze blew through the window. The painting on the wall swayed slightly, as if Mary Ellen were there, blessing, confirming, fulfilling her final mission. Her last wish was no secret. It was hope. It was peace. It was unity. It was unshakable faith. But just when everyone thought the cycle was complete, Sarah found a loose leaf inside the Bible. Just one sentence. You haven't seen everything yet. Maybe you're sitting there right now, silent, with a heavy heart, thinking about how much of your own life has also been bottled up for so long. And maybe, like Mary Ellen, you've carried burdens in silence, kept tears on your pillow, and made difficult choices that no one saw, but that God saw. Mary Ellen's story shows us that there are truths that time cannot erase, and loves that survive even when all seems lost. She didn't live for herself. She lived to protect, love, and obey God's voice, even when it cost her everything. And today, the question remains, what are you saving that you finally need to deliver? Have you ever felt like her? Have you ever had to hide your pain just to protect the ones you love? Have you ever had to choose silence for love? Then perhaps this story isn't just about a house, a will, or a divided family. Maybe this story is also about you. And if so, I invite you to reflect. What promises has God made to you that you haven't yet seen fulfilled? Do you have the courage to keep believing, even when everything seems lost? Because that's what Mary Ellen did. She trusted, even when it didn't make sense. And if you felt something deep inside while listening to this story, know that it wasn't by chance. I truly pray that God will give you strength, clarity, faith, and rest. May He heal what time hasn't. May He restore what the world has tried to break. May He embrace you through these words. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. What would you do if you discovered a secret like that in your family? Could you forgive? Share with me. I want to hear your story too. Because every comment here is a seed planted, and God makes it grow. And before you go, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This helps me continue bringing you stories like this, that heal, that inspire, that transform. And if you can, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that God's love covers a multitude of sorrows.